beloved, a complex topic that has many subtle aspects. If you want to simplify it, you could say you're on a planet where free will reigns supreme. So therefore, a person has the right to decide that it wants to terminate its life without going through a very painful process of illness. This we say based on the fact that free will is the ultimate. But of course, the question is always, how free of a choice are people making? And now we come to the more subtle aspects where, in an ideal situation, people would know certain facts about the spiritual reality. They would know about reincarnation, they would know about the need to resolve your psychology, overcome a certain level of consciousness, and that a physical illness could be an expression of a certain level of consciousness. They would know that there can actually be a certain shift of consciousness that people go through as they are physically ill, and that therefore it could be valuable for their long-term growth that they actually experience the illness to the end, because by going through that process of knowing that the body is dying, they can process many questions, many thoughts, many ideas that they have not thought about earlier in their lives. And so you see here that from a simple perspective, you can say that people have the free will to decide. But again, there can be many cases where if people just decide that they want to avoid the pain, they are actually hindering their growth, and they are actually creating a situation where they will have more limitations in their next lifetime. And they might have the disease reoccur, and they might also come into their next lifetime without having had the resolution that they could have had if they had stayed alive to the end of the process. Now, of course, one of the difficulties that comes into the play is that modern medicine has created certain technology that allows the physical body to be kept alive artificially. And so, if you look at a situation where you didn't have the modern technology, say 100 years ago, somebody contracts a disease. There is then we might call it natural, although no disease is strictly natural, but there is a certain process that this person will go through. And it could be very, very individual, based on giving the person an opportunity to shift their consciousness. You will see, for example, that there are people who are ill and who can come to a point where they say, I'm at peace, I want to go now. And in some cases, they can leave the body behind because they feel they have the resolution to leave. Then there are others who never come to that point. But an illness can be an opportunity for people to face issues that they have not faced before. And therefore, you will say that in the previous time, the so-called natural process of the illness would be adapted to giving the person the maximum opportunity to shift their consciousness. And so you could say that without the intervention of modern medicine, it would be natural that the person would die at a certain time. What you have now is you have, first of all, a mindset in modern medicine that the most important thing is to preserve the physical life. And so you have created these procedures and technology whereby you can extend the physical life for as long as possible. And this means that there are cases where you have extended the lifespan of that person beyond what was natural. In other words, it would have been ideal from a spiritual perspective that the person had died sooner, but now this artificial medicine had kept the person or the physical body alive longer, so that the person is still tied to the body. This also means that there are some cases where the person is kept in a state of great pain longer than normal. And in that case, it can be constructive if a person has the intuitive attunement for the person to say, I feel it's my time to go. I don't want my body to be kept alive any longer. I don't feel I need to experience this pain, or I don't want to be sedated by painkillers. So just allow the body to die. This can be a valid way to do it. But then the person is not seeking to run away from the pain or run away from facing its issues. And so, again, in an ideal situation, the person would know about the spiritual side of life, have resolved many issues during his lifetime, has worked on his intuition, and therefore the person can know, this is my time to go. Just allow it to happen. But if people do not have that, then there are more issues that come into play here. And it becomes much more difficult to say, should society legalize euthanasia? And this is an issue that must be decided in each country because it depends on the national psyche. And it becomes a challenge for the national psyche to deal with this issue, as it always is a challenge for society to deal with these life and death issues. Ideally, every society should be facing a lot of issues, but there is always a tendency that people want to take the easy way out and ignore issues, but there are certain issues of life and death that most people feel they can't ignore. And so that is often the greatest source of growth, not because it needs to be that way, but because of the avoidance. And so it's important in this time that every country has a debate about this and what they should allow. Now, we are in Holland, which has probably the most liberal laws anywhere on the planet about this issue. And I can tell you that in this case, Holland is in many ways too liberal. It has too little respect for life because there isn't the spiritual awareness. And so there has actually developed a certain consciousness in Holland where the people see themselves as being very avant-garde, very advanced, but you are not nearly as advanced as you think because you don't incorporate the spiritual perspective. And so there is a tendency to want to play God. And this you also see especially focused in the medical establishment in Holland, where many doctors feel that they should be allowed to decide when a certain person should die, because they are capable of deciding this. But my beloved, if you have a materialistic approach to life, you are in no way, shape, or form capable of deciding when another human being should die. Believe me, my beloved, tremendous karma can be made by this. And we are not, of course, not interested in anyone making karma unnecessarily. And so, this is an issue where it isn't actually possible for us to give a clear-cut answer about what a particular nation should do. And the reason for this is that even if the lawmakers in a nation were willing to listen to the ascended masters, we wouldn't want to give an answer because we want the nation to go through the process of debating the topic and coming to its own conclusions. And so if we had the ear of the people in a nation, we would still allow them to go through the debate. And then we might at some point step in and give some directions if we saw that they were stuck and that they had the potential to go higher. And so these are the remarks I want to give for now, although this, of course, is not the final word on the issue. Anyone who hasn't asked before? No. Phil?
Yeah. When we speak out against injustice, I know there's this thing of not getting involved in issues, but when we speak out against injustice, to do with a certain degree of passion sometimes, I'm inclined to do this. And apparently some people even swear when they do it. But this
Some people what?
even swear, they get passionate about something. Not
Yeah.
that person. And it's that line sometimes, when you're aware of something, you give your attention, you want to bring awareness to it, but not get caught up into it. I'm still playing with this, and that's the Israel-Palestine situation, to be more specific. Is there anything there that would...
Okay. Yeah. Mother Mary? We talked in our discourse and in your discussions yesterday about speaking from the heart, where when you speak from the heart, you have passion, as most people would call it. But it is not a fear-based passion. It is not a passion that comes from the lower chakras, especially not the solar plexus chakra, and it is not where you have a particular intent about convincing other people. When you get to a certain point on the path, you are very capable of sensing in yourself when you have a fear-based emotional reaction and when you are simply on fire and eager about something. You can learn to tell this difference, and it is not beyond the capability of most of you, so that you can speak out with the conviction and the passion where your words are endowed with an energy that comes from your I Am presence. And this energy can often be the very factor that helps people open their minds or shift their minds. This is what we have called love, because it is an aspect of love when you help shift the minds of other people. But you cannot help shift the minds of other people if you are coming from a fear-based reaction in yourself. So therefore, you need to be willing to look at yourself and willing to look at whether you are in fear or whether you have a particular attachment to a particular solution. Like we have said before, respect that other people have their free will, and respect that it is not so important to bring about a particular outer result. The real goal of the Ascended Masters is to shift consciousness. So if you speak with a goal that you want to shift people's consciousness, you want to help them see something they haven't seen before, but you allow them the freedom to decide whether they will heed your words or whether they will take, you allow them freedom to what action they will take or not take based on what you're saying. Then it is passion, a higher passion, a love-based passion. But when you have an attachment to a certain outcome, and especially wanting people to react a certain way, then it is fear-based, and then even though you may, whether you swear or whether you speak in a certain altered voice, this is not actually the flow of the Spirit. At least not the one Holy Spirit. It may be the flow of some lower spirit that you have opened yourself up to, as you see that much communication among people, especially when they are trying to convince others, comes from lower spirits. Because there are many people in the world who, in order to influence other people or be recognized as an expert or whatever, have been willing to open themselves up to a lower spirit that will give them that sense of power, but of course also takes their energy. You will see, for example, in a political arena, you can actually learn to discern when there are two people in a debate that are in an agitated state of mind, and they are both talking at each other or perhaps even yelling at each other. You can actually see that these are two spirits who are having this argument through these people. And of course, it serves no constructive purpose. Often the purpose really is to draw the audience in to an emotional reaction so that the spirits can steal their energy. Somebody else? Yeah?
my I am presence learn from me having physical experiences?
Okay. You mean specifically a traumatic experience, or?
No, just in general. A secondary question is, why is embodiment an opportunity? And why are there 10 billion life streams that want to embody on Earth?
So was that passion coming from the iron presence, or was how can anybody be so dumb to want it? Gosh. Okay. Mother Mary again. Actually, my beloved, many of the 10 billion life streams that are meant to embody on Earth do not want to be here with their outer minds. But you understand that free will works in a very specific way. Free will does not mean that you can do anything you want, and then when you have done something you wanted, regardless of the consequences, you can still do anything you want. In other words, you can do anything you want, and you can ignore the consequence that it has for others or for yourself, and then you can still continue to do whatever you want at the moment. This is the fallen beings' image of free will that they have tried to project into the collective consciousness, but it is a false image, of course. As we have said before, if you make a choice and the choice has no consequence, you haven't made a choice, and therefore you haven't learned anything. And so what that means is that if you take the traditional concept of karma, in a past life you made certain choices, this created certain karma for yourself, and this karma limits the choices you have now. And so there are many people who have in past lifetimes, whether on Earth or on other planets, created such karma for themselves, they have made choices that had consequences, that now means that in order for them to have a chance to resolve this karma, to free themselves from this karma, they have to take embodiment on Earth. It is their only opportunity to move forward. So we may say that based on their outer minds, they actually don't want to be here, but they have suspended their free will by the karma, by the choices they have made in previous lives, and therefore they have to come into embodiment. Because it is, as we have talked about, the school of hard knocks. When you have entered the school of hard knocks, sometimes the knocks have to become so hard that you finally become willing to look at yourself and say, what is it I have to change in myself in order to avoid running into this situation again and again and again? And naturally, we understand perfectly that when you have had several lifetimes that you have been faced with very difficult circumstances, then you can come to a point where you really don't want to be here, you don't want to deal with this, and you don't understand why anybody would want it. But you can also say that at a higher level, your I am presence wants you to be here, because it wants you to have the experience that you can overcome the circumstances that you have created for yourself. You understand that the conscious you, we have said, is an extension of the I am presence. We could also explain it differently, but let us just go with this explanation. Your I am presence has taken a part of itself, projected it as the conscious you, and it has allowed that part of itself to make choices. And the conscious you has, as was so beautifully explained by the presence of love, been given a certain gift from the I Am Presence that was your being. There's a certain quantity of your being, and through the choices made by the conscious you, you have invested a part of that being in your four lower bodies, in your soul vehicle. And you are now identified with this. And this is why you experience it as a limitation to be an embodiment. This is why you feel that you really don't want to go through this. But the reality is that your I Am Presence wants that part of itself to go through the experience of first immersing yourself in life on earth, coming to identify with it, and then gradually awakening from that experience, whereby you come to recognize that what you previously thought were conditions put upon you from without are largely conditions that you have created yourself. We have said that the collective consciousness, of course, manifests certain conditions that you experience. But what really affects you is your inner reaction. And so, this is what has caused you to experience life as suffering. And so the I Am Presence wants you to have the experience that you can immerse yourself in life on a planet like Earth, but you can also awaken yourself from it and come out of it again. Because when you do this, this becomes a very important experience for your I Am Presence to incorporate in its being. The immersion, the awakening, the push and the pull. This is something that your I Am Presence uses to actually not only learn certain lessons, as you would say on earth, but to expand its being. And so, to refer to the first part of your question, what does your I Am Presence learn from you having experiences on earth? This is a question that cannot be answered with a linear mind, because in the mind you are in, you are thinking about this a certain way, that there has to be certain lessons you are learning. There has to be a certain insight you may come to, or certain limitations you overcome. And that is what you have to do as the conscious you. But your I Am Presence is not in a linear mind. It's in a spherical state of consciousness. And so your I Am Presence looks at your life differently, as we have explained before. It doesn't have the same experience you had. It has a much more expanded spherical awareness. But the I Am Presence can use any experience you have on earth. It can use the immersion, awakening, push-pull to greatly expand its being, its sense of how the material universe works, what gives you a higher experience, what gives you a lower experience. The I Am Presence has a completely different way of looking at this, that it is very difficult to put words on, because your linear mind will start relating them to the experiences you have on earth. And the I Am Presence does not experience your life that way. And so it is best for you just to be aware that whatever you have gone through on earth, your I Am Presence uses it to expand its being. And this is really why being an embodiment is an opportunity. It is more of an opportunity for the I Am Presence, you might say, but what is the I Am Presence? Is it not you? Are you not an aspect of the I Am Presence? You have come to see yourself as a separate being, but as we have attempted to explain before, the ascension is really where the conscious you recognizes that it was not separate from the I Am Presence. And again, this is a process that is difficult to put words on, because you cannot understand this with a linear mind, what happens to the conscious you when you ascend. You can only experience it, but you don't need to experience it until you ascend. And before you ascend, you don't need to understand it. You just need to know that there comes this point where the conscious you goes through a radical change. but it is not something you need to worry about ahead of time. What you need to be concerned about is how you take the next step towards the 144th level of consciousness, so that you are qualified to ascend. And that basically means freeing the conscious you from the immersion, from the identification with earth, but especially with your four lower bodies. And you can, as we have said before, you can actually make the conscious shift where you accept this process and you don't look at it in a negative way. You don't regret it. You don't have this sense of why would anybody be embodiment on earth, because you can actually make the conscious shift where you are at peace with being an embodiment. And this is the shift we have attempted to help you make in this conference, where you are at peace with being who you are at your present level of consciousness. You accept yourself for who you are. You can even love yourself for who you are, and you can certainly recognize that you can feel our love the way you are right now and at the level you are at right now. And when you feel our love, when you are at peace with being an embodiment, my beloved, suddenly it isn't so bad to be an embodiment. And it can have certain enjoyable aspects. And there can come a point, my beloved, where you actually can recognize on the spiritual path a very simple thing. There are many spiritual people that have talked of, focused on overcoming the desires of the flesh, as the Christians say, because they think it's sinful, or they think it keeps you from your spiritual growth, because it keeps your attention focused on the physical object. But there can come that point where you are not engaging in physical activities out of this compulsive need or desire. You're not feeding your ego, but you can come to the point where you say, I am in a physical body, and there are certain activities I like doing, and you do them with a sense of peace, and you enjoy them. Why wouldn't you enjoy? My beloved, do not construe the concept of a spiritual path to think that you really shouldn't be an embodiment, you should be ascended. And therefore, as long as you are not ascended, you should punish yourself by not enjoying any aspect of life on earth. Have we ever said that this is the way to make progress on the path? I am not aware that we have. But of course, I know very well that the Christians have taught this for centuries, and many other spiritual teachers have taught it. But what we are saying here is this: when you have overcome the compulsive desires, for example, for eating, then there is nothing wrong with enjoying a good meal in the company of good friends or even alone, and fully enjoying it, being in the now, enjoying that activity. There is nothing unspiritual or sinful about it. And when you come to that point and you make peace with being an embodiment, you can begin to enjoy life in embodiment. And then you can actually come to the point where you are not longing to get out of here. This doesn't mean you want to be here longer than necessary, but you are at peace with being here and realizing that you still have some time in the physical body, and why not enjoy that time? In a sense, we have before given certain teachings that the only way to be ultimately free of certain conditions is to actually come to accept the conditions to the point where, whether they continue or don't continue, you are at peace. And this doesn't apply to all conditions in the physical octave, certainly. I'm not saying that you need to come to the point where you can be at peace with being tortured by somebody. But when it comes to being in embodiment and living a relatively normal life, I can assure you that you will not actually make your ascension until you are fully at peace with being an embodiment and you are able to enjoy certain aspects of it. The ascension is not a process of escapism. You cannot ascend if you are running away from something. And as long as you have not fully made peace and fully accepted what being an embodiment offers you in a positive way, you cannot actually ascend. There are people, my beloved, not many, but there are some, who have followed a spiritual teaching that talked about how you need to starve the body or overcome the desires of the body and be completely free of the desires of the body. And they have also followed other teachings about balancing karma, and they have actually come to a point where they have balanced enough karma, they have resolved certain psychology where they could actually ascend. But they have one reason why they cannot ascend, and it is that they have never felt at peace with being an embodiment, and they have never allowed themselves to enjoy the positive aspects of being an embodiment. And therefore, they cannot ascend. They cannot make the switch in the mind of leaving the body behind. And I know that many of you have had very difficult embodiments, even in this lifetime, but also in many previous lifetimes. And I know that it can be very, very difficult, having gone through deep trauma, to actually find some enjoyment in life. But I also know it is possible to make that shift if you are willing. And so always, there is a point where you can't make the shift, even if you were willing, because you're not ready. But there comes a point where you can make the shift because you have healed enough of your fallen bodies, you've resolved enough psychology,